Good evening, everyone. This is a special edition of the European Resilience Initiative Center, in which I kicked out Sergej Sumlenny, our traditional host and director, from his host chair and run the live stream myself. My name is Sasha Ostanina. I'm a co-director of the European Resilience Initiative Center and also an EU Security and Foreign Policy Fellow at the Berlin-based Jacques Delors Center. Today, our special live stream has two guests. One of them you already know, Sergej Sumlenny, the founder and the managing director of the European Resilience Initiative Center. And also joining us from Kiev, Jason J. Smart. He is a correspondent of the English language online website, online media organization, Kiev Post. And I'm very happy to have you both here. And today we're going to talk about an amazing experience, and I'm pretty sure that many people envy you. I definitely do envy your experience that you recently got in Ukraine and in Russia as well, as Sergey and Jason traveled to the Ukraine-occupied territory of Russia, Kursk region, that got under the Ukrainian control since 2 weeks ago, and is now available for people, for Ukrainian troops and for international journalists to visit. Hey guys, I have multiple questions to you, but my first question, I guess, goes to Jason. So did they start already accepting Ukrainian hryvnias as the paying method, or did you still have to exchange currency? As far as I understand, Jason has just lost the audio connection, and while we are dealing with the technical issues, I'm going to divert this question to Sergey.
Yeah, hi, Sasha. First of all, okay, Jason. As soon as you got audio, please give us a sign, like with a hand or in the messenger. Otherwise, try to reconnect, and I'm sure we will get you back. But yeah, Sasha. First, like we spent like several hours in Suja. We came to Ukraine, occupied Russian territory, and came back. And I really want everyone to taste slowly these words on the tongue. Ukraine occupied Russian territory. Ukraine has managed to send its troops, a regular army, to Russia and to nuclear state and to control its territory, part of its territory, expand and control, and Russia has done nothing. And Ukraine is acting according to the international law. It is self-defense. It is absolutely legitimate from the point of view of international law. It's absolutely legitimate act, and according to the UN Charter, and Russia knows it, and the West knows it, and that is amazing, absolutely amazing. Regarding money now, I actually like we don't like. I cannot tell you like how exactly like the whole system works there, because we were pretty sure there we have not like entered any shops or etc. And the locals told us that the shops just they don't work. Like the economy has collapsed on for logically on the first in the first days, and the Russian civilians who left there in Suja, they are allowed practically to take like some goods from the shops which they need for their daily life, like water, simple food, toilet paper, etc. We have seen all the ladies who were carrying things from the doing things like from sorry, like bringing these things from the shops. And yeah, like I cannot call it looting because it is not bad intended. It's about like providing people with basic things. But the Ukrainian army now provides the Russian citizens who are in Suja, provides them with basic things. Also, they bring water. they organized water supply, etc., etc. So that is how it goes on. Yeah, I hope Jason will join us now. Write him now. Jason, would you join Video Ninja now,
Well,
please?
you're writing, Jason, Sergey. While you're writing, Jason, I wanted to ask how, so from what you've described and from reports I've seen from multiple media reporting on the ground, this situation is quite different from back in 2022 when Russia has taken under control some of the Ukrainian territories, and there were multiple reports telling how Russian troops treated Ukrainian civilians back then. When did you have a chance to chat with the locals, with the Russians in those territories? What did they share about the experience of Ukrainian troops entering those territories and later taking control and taking administrative control of those territories and treating the Russian citizens?
Well, the situation is tricky. I need to tell you the Ukrainian army was not prepared for that. I need to say, like, nobody was thinking about like what to do. Ukrainian army never had experience of occupying another country, like how to do it, how to organize it. And I need to tell you that what Ukrainian army has done already is exceptional. It's really exceptional. And there are like the local population feels well as much as you can feel under occupation. We have seen how the locals communicate with the soldiers, absolutely friendly, in friendly manner, everything is fine. And yeah, and the idea, the main idea is to preserve the local population and to let them live their life, which is now is being organized. But in addition to that, of course, like the question arises: what is about police? What is about like other things? What is about the situation on the ground? Like when, let me say, okay, the population is like several dozen thousands people there. If one person steals something from another person, or kills, or beats, or insults, or wants to sell something, like who are the authorities? And that are like all the questions which arise normally, naturally, from the situation. And I think that the Ukrainian army is now like thinking, oh gosh, we didn't know like that. It looks like that. It's like really like it's challenging, but they're doing well. Once again, I saw how the Russian civilians talk to the Ukrainian soldiers, how they respond back, and many Russian civilians they stress that they understand the language, that they speak Ukrainian. They even said, "Oh, we are like we understand Ukrainian. We are Ukrainians." And that is also interesting. I see that Jason is joining us. I will try to give him now the link, and he will join us, I hope. So they say we understand Ukrainian, we can speak Ukrainian, we talk Ukrainian, and we are like historically Ukrainians, which is true. The territory is Ukrainian originally, like 100 years ago, and was arbitrarily like divided from Ukraine. It doesn't mean that Ukraine wants to annex this territory, but it means that these people, they don't see in Ukrainian army like a sort of an enemy. I think, yeah, I think that is the reason. I think that Jason has joined us. Can you hear us, Jason?
I hear you.
That's fantastic, mate.
Very good. So we're here finally after some technical difficulties.
Yeah,
Anyway,
we seem to be experiencing some of the difficulties because people are complaining that my microphone is too loud, so I'm going to be trying to be quieter. Jason, my next question goes to you. Tell us about how did you enter this territory? So what's the logistics from the Ukrainian side? Mostly, I would assume that those journalists who are traveling now to those territories. So was it difficult to enter? Did you need to have any special permissions? How did you do that?
well, I was with Sergej. That's how. But no, in general, there's a policy of how to get in, and they are restricting press access even today, even to go near the area, not even cross over into Kursk, but to go even on the Ukrainian side, closer to the border, is something that they're trying to control. And I think there's a few reasons. One is that there is active fighting going on in the vicinity, and also Ukraine has a desire to keep closed what it's trying to accomplish there. But it's in total, in the past 2 weeks, there's only been a handful of news crews that have been there. It's a very small number, actually. And moreover, I think that just in the press that has been there, they weren't allowed much access. They were not there for very long periods of time. It was usually brought in for a couple of hours, few hours, and then they left. And I think that that's probably not surprising, despite the fact in Donbass, the press actually does have quite a bit of access. It's much easier to get in and out of. In the case of Kursk, they are restricting it much, much more. So what I expect is going forward that they're going to probably formalize a process to make it easier and more clear as to how this all works. But for the time being, that's something they have not worked on yet.
So when you entered those territories, and I guess you had a chance to meet local people and chat with them, what are their thoughts? What are their impressions? What are they sharing with journalists?
So, I mean, the local population that we met, most everybody who was out and about was out because they're looking for food or water, things like that. Most everyone else, and you would ask people, where's everybody? And they'd said, most people are staying at home. If there's no reason to be out, they're not out. Which, to be fair, there's a lack of electricity right now in the city. It seems that running water might be a problem as well, as is phone communications. So there's sort of an isolation to what's actually going on day to day. I don't think that they have a lot of knowledge of what's going on in Russia or in Ukraine. And I think that was sort of interesting. The other thing that's sort of interesting is that they assign blame to Putin for this. I asked a number of people what they felt the Russian government would do for them, or if they expected the Russian government to do something for them. And they said no. They thought that Putin had abandoned them, or that, I asked one guy, do you think he's been forgotten by the Kremlin? And his answer was, yes, I think so. But at the same time, I don't know if they ever really cared what happened to us one way or the other. So I think that there is a lot of dissatisfaction with people. And actually, I've seen big data studies that have come out in the past few days looking at the people of Kursk that shows that not the occupied territories, the rest of the area, it shows that people have really lost faith in the Russian government's ability to take care of them.
It sounds very interesting because at least what I gathered from previous Russian impressions and what my experience in dealing with Russians allowed me to understand is that Russians try to put blame on local authorities or regional authorities normally and just say that, okay, Putin just doesn't know what's happening. Once the second Putin knows what's happening, he will come and he will take care of that. He will take control. He will do everything to restore the order. And so in that case, it seems that Putin is already the first to blame. Is my impression correct? Did you get a similar impression from on the ground?
So, I think it's actually, it's a positive role shift because in general, people do try to assign blame on those around him, the boyars, not the czar. But you do see a shift, I think, in dictatorships as a whole when people start to disassociate with it. They no longer think that he is actually the representation necessarily of good, but they start to say the war is because of him. Germans, it was Hitler that did the war. It wasn't me or my family. It was Hitler. It was his war. And you start to shift the blame to somebody else. And it's an important moment. But definitely, at least the people living underneath Ukrainian occupation, I think a lot of them are probably ready to shift over to that viewpoint, which takes the blame off of them and puts it on somebody else, and no longer believe that he is the leader that has a great plan for them. Maybe he has no plan for them, or maybe just doesn't care about them. So I do think that there has been a shift for at least the people living underneath occupation. Now, whether that will spread to a larger swath of Russian society is debatable. I fear that it won't in the way that we'd hope. But this is certainly something that's not helping the government in Moscow very much.
Sergej, you have studied the development in Germany pre and during World War II, and you know very well how the German society functioned at that time and how it tried to administer who should be blamed for what's happening with the country. I'm not a big fan of putting those parallels together, but if we compare the German society during World War II and the Russian society at the moment, can you say in what year Russians live at the moment? Is it 1943, 1944?
Oh, that is an absolutely brilliant question. Like $1 million question. We don't know. Like I always love to ask this question to my friends. Like, are we now like in 1939? Are we now in 1943, or are we already like in some other age? Yeah, who knows? But what I personally absolutely love is when we went there and you see that all the myths, which Russia, Kremlin, Putin, his pundits in Russia and in the West, they try to spread, they're all myths, they're all lies. They like all of Scholz and Joe Biden, or say like Jake Sullivan, or like some guys and girls in Germany. They love to tell a story about the red lines, like Russia's red lines. If you hate, like, if one single German missile towerist hates the goddamn bridge, Kerch bridge, then the red lines will be crossed. Like terrible nuclear escalation. Russia's red line, like holy sacred bridge, are terrible. Like Putin will annihilate the West because you have hit his precious little bridge. Now, like the Ukrainian army controls for 2 weeks in a row 1,000 square kilometers, 700 square miles, and expanding, taking posts like 100 posts, killing Russian soldiers, destroying Russian equipment in Russian soil. Like I was driving in a U.S. provided Humvee on the Russian soil, and I saw a lot of IVs, tanks, everything. HIMARS are just striking Russian territory. Like you stay around and you see like all these missiles going up, and the soldiers are happy because they have finally hit Russia where it hurts, and no red line was crossed. Like nuclear escalation, no. Threats, no. Nothing, really nothing, as if nothing happened. And Putin just like goes to his media press conference and reads from a paper like Older Brezhnev, some bullshit about the massive provocation against Russia Federation, but the Russian people has united around the army and decisively rejects any attempts to crack the unity of the Russian society. And I thought, dude, it's so 1979. Are you insane? What are you talking about? Massive provocation. It's not massive provocation. It's a full-scale invasion into your territory. And if it is a massive provocation for you, I don't know what is a red line for you. I really hope that J.K. Rowling would write her next book, which will be called Red Lines and Other Fantastic Beasts, and where Putin hides them. Because his red line is a fantastic beast. Like everyone heard about it. It's like a hypergraph or a sea dragon. It's a legend. There is no such thing. I really hope that many people in the West who develop their strategy against Russia will see it and will say, okay, maybe we were wrong. It's nothing bad to be wrong. It's bad not to accept reality. And reality is Russia can be beaten. Russia is being beaten right now. And there is no consequence for that. And that's a good sign.
Yeah, talking about the red lines, I remember when Germany was debating whether to send tanks to Ukraine, and sending tanks to Ukraine was considered to be a red line that Germany was afraid to cross. And when observing it from Germany, at least now, there are positive developments in which Germany says that German-made tanks operating in Kursk region are not German tanks, they're Ukrainian tanks, and hence all of those claims that those red lines that Russia put and has been crossed by the West, they are false. So when it comes to kind of military equipment that you saw on the ground, what did you see? I know that there are also debates between what Ukraine can and cannot use on the Russian territories. Did you have any chats with Ukrainian troops on the ground? Did you discuss if there are any like operational restrictions put by the army?
Yeah, Jason, maybe you start with the impressions that you have gathered there.
So, I mean, obviously the U.S. still does have the restrictions that it's put on the Ukrainians. Even the HIMARS, for instance, that we did see in usage was something that was from the Ukrainian territory. It did not cross over into Russia, which is just sort of a funny, the letter of the law. They can go within a couple kilometers or kilometer of the Russian border and fire into Russia, but they cannot bring the actual system into the occupied territory because that crosses a red line. And it just shows you just how meaningless these red lines are. And it's just fantasy. There's no basis for it. It's not scientific. And they just decided before that they would put tons of restrictions. They've eased those restrictions, but they just can't get over the notion that perhaps Russia really just can't do anything about it. They really can't respond. I mean, just remember, Suja before the war probably only had 5,000 something people in it, total population. It was quite small. All the people that we saw, at least, or the ones I saw, were quite old. I guess almost essentially everybody's over the age of 65 or 70. I'd presume that a lot of people got out when they could or have left. So when you're dealing with this very small population, this little town, and Russia can't do anything about it, I mean, it really can't take it back. That's sort of amazing when you really consider it. And it's actually sort of profound. They had the world's second largest military, or second greatest military in their lore and myths, and they cannot take back a town in their own country that has a population of perhaps 1,500 people today. That's astoundingly bad. It's astoundingly bad. And it shows a lot, I think, of the fact that, what these red lines are is that they're representing a country that no longer exists. I think that the people that write these policies for the United States are living in this thought of the, Cold War, where it was the Soviet Union, which had actual, competent people doing different things. Today, it's just such a corrupt, broken system that it has no capacity to respond even when it's required to. And so I think that it's unfortunate that the U.S. has decided to keep these restrictions, but over time, undoubtedly, they will start to be, chipped away because, as the other ones already have, because it's just so clear that they're baseless.
And what I also wanted to add here on, what I wanted also to add here, like we can see, like regarding like what Jason talked about corruption. I would say that we see a very interesting, at least like that was my impression on the ground. On the Ukrainian side, you see not only a lot of movement, you see a lot of equipment which is on the ground. We saw literally hundreds of IFVs just moving around, like just doing their business. A lot of soldiers, camps with well-fed soldiers who are very happy. And, like when you pass a checkpoint and the soldiers are not happy and scared and nervous, you mention it because they're angry. Because you don't like to pass a checkpoint with scared soldiers because it can end badly. And I went with Jason through different checkpoints on the ground, and I tell you, the soldiers were confident. They knew what they do. They felt they have power. And from that well-skilled, well-prepared, well-empowered position, they deal with you with all respect and with knowledge what they do. And that's a very good feeling to see that Ukrainian might is there. And those who say that Ukraine overstretches its capacities, or that Ukraine is on the edge of collapsing, like the success is too big, like tomorrow Russia will strike it. No. That's not what I saw there. It's not what I saw. I saw that Ukraine can strike even more. We just don't know. And the Russians don't know where Ukraine will strike. That's one thing. Another thing is Russia's unpreparedness. Guys, we saw lines and lines and lines of Ukrainian defenses in Suja. Like pillboxes, dragon teeth, barbed wire, everything. It's only what you see from the road. Endless defensive line, multiply defensive lines. On the Russian side, you go to Suja, it's about like 10 kilometers, like 8 miles from the border. You maybe see one very weak tetrahedral line, and maybe even Ukrainians have installed it already. I don't know. I think that the Russians just have stolen all the money they said they invest into the defense. And once again, like, hello, Anti-Corruption Foundation by Alexei Navalny. Do you still think that corruption is a bad thing in Russia? I don't think so, because I saw that there were almost no fighting around Suja. You go there, you see like a couple of racks of equipment, which is normal, but you don't see huge destructions. You don't see like every house like you see it in Bakhmut or in Avdiivka or in other cities in Ukraine, where it's really like fighting for every house, every single house. You don't see it in Suja. Suja was taken not without fighting. You see the consequences of fighting in the center of the city, but most parts of Suja are pretty much intact. When you enter Suja, you see all the buildings like which are intact. Some like camp where people can live, or maybe it was like some sports school or something, churches, villages, etc., etc. Roads are in good condition. That means that there were like no like all non-stop riding on tanks, etc. And it's not what you expect in a heavy contested areas, and that means that the Russians did not fight, decided not to fight. In the center, yes, you see damages, but it's where like the police station is, the FSB station, etc. They have guns there. Of course, they try to defend, but in other areas, no. And then we talked to like some commanders, and commanders told us about their experience, how they take other villages and towns. They say like in most cases, Russian soldiers just surrender. They just surrender. In some cases where they don't surrender, the Ukrainians call artillery strike, and they just wipe out the Russian resistance. And I think it is really cool, because this Ukrainian commander who was telling us that, he had such a shiny face, because I think for the first time in his life, finally, he does what he wanted to do since early 22, to bring this war to where it came from, and to pay back. And once again, what I saw, how they communicate with the civilians, it is absolutely like from the textbook of being a good occupation power in accordance to the international law. But the Russian soldiers, they better surrender. They better surrender, because if they're not, they will be wiped out.
And I guess that this reality soldiers abandoning this territory and trying to get away kind of underlines the hypocrisy of the Russian state when they're claiming that they're going to protect the Russian-speaking population. And then in order to do that, of course, in clamors, they wipe out Ukrainian cities and Ukrainian villages. But when it comes to protecting the Russian-speaking population living in Russia, they don't do anything. And I also wonder how much money will be invested into the reconstruction efforts of these territories, and hence,
Sasha, I'm sorry for interrupting, but it's like the question which I read in the charts, which is definitely related to what I have said, and I think like a person says that what I tell is like some not regarding the fact. Like Sebastian Forbes writes that locals raise corruption issues over Kharkiv fortification as Russia advances, and it is clearly like a title of some like news reporting from several months ago as Russians try to attack Kharkiv region. Look, Sebastian, just compare to offensive operations. Just compare to offensive operations. Russia's in Kharkiv, where you say corruption, no fortification, etc. The Russians took one village, Vovchansk, close to the border, and were beaten back. No advance in any like more than 10 kilometers, nothing, maybe 5 kilometers. Not about like 10 kilometers, nothing. And then they were beaten back. In Kursk, the Ukrainian army controls 1,000 square kilometers, 1,700 square miles within 2 weeks. The Russians were fighting there at Kharkiv like for 2 months, and were not able to get anything. Now the Ukrainians control 1,000 square kilometers, and you say, okay, someone reported that there was corruption allegedly in Kharkiv defensive lines. No, you just like it's just against the facts. The Russian army could not break into Kharkiv region, but the Ukrainian army has easily taken more territory of Russia than Russia has gained in whole Ukraine since the start of the year. Just compare to facts. Just compare to facts. Just do your math. Just do your homework.
Oh, I guess Sebastian did his math, and he claimed that Kursk adds an extra 500 kilometers to the front line, which is, again, not true, because the front line does not multiply in such a formation. I want to urge you to, if you're interested in supporting, if you want to support the Ukrainian army, either in the Kursk direction or in general, we do have a donation campaign running. You can find a link in the description of this live stream. Please, every small donation matters. We do transfer supplies, humanitarian supplies, to the Ukrainian population and to the Ukrainian military units, and we report regularly on them. You can follow us on Twitter, on X, and see how many of those humanitarian supplies we're providing to the Ukrainian army and population. Jason, my next question goes to you, and I want to compare maybe, or to ask about the attitude of the Ukrainians living in the Sumy region, that's the region bordering Russia's Kursk region, because just a few days ago there were yet another strike of Russia on the Ukrainian residential areas in Sumy. So what do the locals tell you when you chat, if you had a chance to chat with them in the Sumy region?
You know, it's like all the regions of Ukraine suffers from Russia's terrorism. I don't think anyone's surprised by it anymore. And I'm sure the people of Sumy understand very well that'll probably increase over time, especially now that Ukraine is using Sumy as a launching point for the operations in Kursk. So I think it's predictable that we'll see more terrorism there. But in general, I think that there's an inverse relationship. I think the Ukrainians, the more that they're attacked, are coming to the conclusion that the only option is victory. Versus the people in Kursk are just ready for it to end. They don't care. They don't wish to fight. They don't want to see any more fighting. They would be happy to you know, just go where things used to be. They are not the same as the people in Ukraine. The people of Ukraine, I think this, you know, the huge sacrifice. There's been a lot of people who have died. Everybody knows friends or family who have died in the front, and so it's something that I think they feel that they are obligated to avenge that and to seek victory. In the case of the Russians, I don't think it's that way at all. I think increasingly, and just once again, speaking to the sentiments of the people in Kursk that we spoke to, but also looking at the big data reports that have come out in the last few days, popular sentiment in Russia is changing. We see that the population is not excited by this war, even if they might have been when it started, and they were all inspired by the propaganda around it. I think increasingly they just realize this is just insanity. It's just useless. It's not providing any positive or any result for Russia. Rather than go after the NATO, future NATO member Ukraine that's got filled with Nazis, they see that their own Russian soldiers today, 600,000 Russian soldiers estimated. We passed the 600,000 mark. 600,000 Russian soldiers have been killed or maimed in Ukraine. Russia's boundaries with NATO is much longer now than it was before the war, thanks to Finland and Sweden. We see that the Russian economy is having significant problems. The key interest rate, again, increased by another 2 points last week. And it's going to probably keep going up, perhaps as high as 25%. The mortgages that people have, Russia's a heavily mortgaged society. Well, guess what? Those are going to have flexible rates. And it looks like the mortgage rates, or sorry, I should say the monthly fees that they pay are going to keep going up, which is going to make a lot of people lose their houses or their investments. Russia is really structured poorly economically, socially, and militarily. I see nothing to be positive about within Russia. And the data would all suggest that the average Russian would agree with that assessment. They don't see things going well. They don't have any hope for the future. And it has more and more of the feelings that things are getting out of control.
And I would assume that another indicator of the Russian economy being in a bad shape and Russia's trying the best to get more soldiers is the number of, or the amount of monthly payments that Russia is ready to pay to get more soldiers. Can you elaborate on that recent developments?
Sure. I mean, different regions of Russia are offering different programs to join the military. Ranges quite a bit. Let's say about $22,000 one-time bonus plus a monthly salary to join the military. Now, as you can guess, you see that it's attracted a lot of people that have economic problems. There's been a lot of people that it's been able to recruit who are not really qualified to be soldiers. They're not really set on the path of soldiering, and they're being killed in large numbers. Russia is just losing people at a phenomenal rate, which is just hard to really fathom, actually, just meaninglessly. I mean, it's not advancing Russia. Russia isn't making progress due to their sacrifice. They're just dying. And that shows that there's a lack of strategy. And where it comes down to, I think, the really big problem that Russia faces, though, is that senior military, it's beginning now to really lack the institutional knowledge that you would typically expect in a military. More than 90% of the Russian military that was there in 2022 has been killed. There's just not people that know how to do what they need to do. And look at Kursk, once again, great example. Putin counted on the Russian military to take care of it. They promised it'll all be wrapped up in a couple of days, as did Kadyrov, as did others. And guess what? They have not been able to wrap it up. In fact, Ukraine expanded further. And more to that point, Putin then appointed people from the FSB, and then the director of the FSB. Then he appointed another guy from his former FSB to run the operations there. And the reason is simple, is that he realizes his military cannot even take back a Russian village of less than 5,000 people. So this is pretty drastically bad. And I think it'll about to get worse, not just because there's increasing conflict between the FSB and the military, but also because FSB people that he's appointing do not have the experience necessary to know how to execute a military operation or how to plan them. So I think it's going to just be more and more Russian soldiers coming down their convoys and seeing HIMARS just wipe them away. It's going to be more and more of that. And there's no reason to think that Russia is going to learn from these mistakes. They're just going to keep repeating them and lacking the experience necessary or the knowledge base necessary to judge what would be a better solution or to think, outside the box. They don't even have the basic understanding of what should be done. So they're just going to make more and more horrific decisions that are just going to keep destroying the Russian military.
Sergej, if we look at the Frontline in general, do you see this kind of decreasing level of knowledge, decreasing level of understanding what Russian troops are doing, and do you see that the reflection of this dropping knowledge among Russian troops across what Russia has been able to gain throughout the last year?
Well, amazing question. I first try to add a bit to what Jason said, then I come back to what he was first regarding the local population which we saw at Suja. Very friendly people, concerned with Russian terror, of course, because in the village which we're going through, close to this exclusion zone, because the Ukrainians have created such sort of exclusion zone between the border to Russia and the territory where people can move freely, and on the village, on the Y, you can see houses which are destroyed by Russian gliding bombs. Because Russians drop gliding bombs without any discrimination between military or non-military targets. Of course, even killing Ukrainian soldiers on Ukrainian soil is a crime and a crime of aggression. But killing, targeting civilians indiscriminately adds another war crime to this crime. And that's what the Russians are doing. And we were talking with, one family, which is now evacuating their elderlies, their grandmothers, to the west of Ukraine, to Brody. And they were really concerned with Russian terror because and the glide bomb hits the house across the street, you think, okay, maybe I will be the next because my neighbors are gone. And regarding what Jason said about the economy, I really recommend you to watch on the Euro Resilience channel, Eric channel, which you're now watching live. I really recommend you to watch one of the amazing comments by Gustav Grassel, who is a research fellow at the European Resilience Initiative Center, and he recorded a comment on the parallels between Russia's collapse, Russian imperial collapse after World War I, and Russia's economy now. And he brings very interesting parallel on inflation, which is being increased by this military spending on compensations for soldiers and for their families, and how this inflation can ruin Russian economy pretty much. But regarding your question, Sasha, on what do we know about Russian movement? First, good thing that the Russians know less about Ukrainian movements than the Ukrainians know about Russian movements. But we see two developments, very interesting one. The first is that, and it's bad development, that the Russians did not pull their troops away from Pokrovsk axis, Pokrovsk direction in Donbass. I've been to Pokrovsk less than 1 week ago. I brought drones, which you have donated, for the 47th Mechanized Brigade, and the guys were really happy to get them. Thank you so much for your donations. And I spent like the whole day and night with the guys, and we were talking a lot, and I saw like what they do and how they work. And the problem is that they had to move from Mirnograd, which is a neighboring city a bit closer to the front line, to Pokrovsk, because the location in Mirnograd was not safe anymore. It was in the direct direction of all Russian practical weapons. And the Russians are advancing there. And I asked them, what do you think about Kursk? And the answer was very interesting, because first they were absolutely happy. And they started like to laugh, like, yeah, it's such an amazing thing, such a great thing. They're so happy. It's so fascinating. We're so happy to see you. And I ask you, wait, you're happy because the Russians don't attack you anymore? Say, oh, no, 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 no. Russians attack us as they used to attack us before. The only difference is the Russians don't use gliding bombs as much as they used before, because a lot of Russian aviation is in the north now, and Ukrainians have destroyed several warehouses with Russian gliding bombs in Lipetsk air base. But the troops on the ground, no, they're attacking as they used to attack. I said, why? And, oh, it's very natural, they said, because Pokrovsk is the only area where the Russians gain some success, where their offensive operation is successful. And they will never sacrifice this success against defending of Kursk. That's why they will push further. But they say, we're happy to see that Russians are being beaten there strategically. It's a good thing. It's a motivation thing. It's really amazing. We're watching how it goes further, etc. And then, like, in the middle of the night, they took their smartphones and started to show me the maps. And it was clear that they were fascinating. And I tell you, these guys sleep 2-3 hours a day. Okay, 24 hours. They sleep 2-3 hours. And when they invest that much time in following the situation in Kursk, that means that situation in Kursk is really interesting for them, and they're really happy to see. But what we see in Russian lines overall, we see that the Russians don't know how to balance it. They pull conscripts and send them to Kursk. They don't know what to do. We have seen the stories how people who wanted to refuse to serve were put into the first line. The Kadyrov troops are not happy with what they do. We talked to commanders who said how many Kadyrovцы they have captured, and Kadyrovцы is a very valuable asset as a POW, as prisoner of war, because we know out of history that Russia exchanged Kadyrovцы for Ukrainian prisoners of war with great pleasure. But we don't know like what exactly is the Russian answer. Where can they fight? The good thing is that because we don't have red lines, like there is this belief that if Russia gets provoked, Russia will respond with some escalation. It just cannot. Russia attacks Ukraine with all Russia can. And if Russia doesn't do something, for example, Russia does not carpet bomb Ukrainian cities, it's not because Russia spares carpet bombing for some provocation time. No, just because Russia cannot. Russia tried to carpet bomb Ukrainian cities early this full-scale invasion and was stopped by Ukrainian air defense. If not the Ukrainian air defense, Russia would have transferred the Ukrainian cities into some sort of Aleppo, transformed them into some sort of Aleppo, like they tried to do it in Chernihiv. So the good thing is that there is nothing Russia can do massively against Ukraine except of continuing doing what Russia already is doing. And that's why the Russia can just try to move troops from one direction to another, or use some sort of attacks, or most probably use diplomacy, try to undermine Ukraine's support in the West, etc. But there is nothing like huge and terrible what Russia can do.
For those of you who is interested in Russia's use of glide bombs and how Ukraine can counter this threat, we have a battlefield breakdown series with Mykola Beliskov, who talks about the this development in Russian warfare and how it started and how Russia is employing those glide bombs nowadays and what Ukraine can do against it. Jason, my question to you, and there is a question in the chat that I want to pose to you, asking about refugees, if there are any refugees going to Moscow, relocated to Moscow. But I also want to kind of look a little bit more in general on the question of the red lines of the Russian people. So do you think that there could be a red line in the Kursk region offensive, that would be a red line for the Russian people who would go to Moscow literally or online or in any other way and say, that's enough. And then my question is, I don't know, stage a revolution, demand for elections. So do you think that there's a development in the Kursk region that could kind of bring a larger light on what's going on in the Russo-Ukrainian war for the Russian people?
So I think for the Russian people as a whole, being passive is a trait that I noticed in relationship to the national government over generations, not something recent. But I think that it's unlikely that there's a red line in that sense, that the Russian people rise up due to Kursk. I've never made that argument before. At the same time, I do often make the argument I think Putin will be overthrown. And I do not think that's going to be due to the people rising up. I think it's much more likely there's a red line that might trigger something. For instance, the arrest of various senior military officers at this point, or the military being ordered to do things that just gets them killed, like go down and fight with HIMARS. Were they, and by the way, now being made subordinate to people that come from the FSB. Something like this, these little things that, it's very hard to predict what will happen. And I was just speaking with someone from Russia earlier today about this. And I said, oh, but that's nothing, that's not a big deal. And I said, no, you're right. None of these things is by itself, they're going to be the big thing. None of it's going to be, well, oh my God, now Russia's definitely going to overthrow their leader. What it is, though, it's just, it's that single straw that breaks the camel's back. It's been one thing after another things after another things, and it trickles and trickles. And I think that one thing that we might see is just the mass surrender of troops. At some point, when you just see troops unwilling to fight, either they run back the other direction or they surrender, but it's something that trickles and trickles and trickles. And it's little by little. But at some point, it just starts to go really awry. And I can see that actually happening economically in Russia, too, with inflation. But that's a different story. But in this case, I think as far as Kursk goes, it's trickle and trickle, little by little. And then something can just sort of occur that was not expected. Somebody just realizes this is their moment to take power, or this is their moment to end this, or this is, they fear that they're going to go to jail next for corruption, whatever it is that causes them to take action that could totally destabilize the Russian government. We've seen that Russia is not a stable government. It's very far from being a stable government. It looks like it externally, and everyone mentions that, but I think that shows a total lack of understanding how dictatorships that are successful look. They don't look like Russia's. Putin, and I think one of Putin's other great, and there's a lot of faults, but in his leadership, but one of the faults, even if he wished to stay a dictator, is that he's unwilling to cope with reality. We saw that in his relationship to how he spoke to the governor of Kursk at the first press conference about this, where he refused to listen to the realities of what was occurring in the country. But we also see that when he's got, for years now, Kadyrov lying to him about being able to take care of situations, and hence why Kadyrov's troops get all this value that they don't deserve. Let's be honest, when Prigozhin was coming, it took them 9 hours to get to something that should have been a 4-hour drive. Why is that? Well, it's because Kadyrov didn't want to fight. Where are they right now in Kursk region? We know that a lot of them have been avoiding conflict. They say, oh, the Ukrainians just got by us. Well, give me a break. They were obviously trying to avoid conflict. But Putin meets with him still, believes all his fairy tales he's been told. And the military tells him the same fairy tales. When the Kursk offensive began, the military is promising this to be over in 2 or 3 days. And that sort of rhetoric. And we've seen now it's been 2 weeks and still it's not moving. In fact, Ukraine's going further into Russia. So what's going on? And at some point, what will be the point where there's a breakthrough in the lines and Ukraine starts to do a run and really starts to make progress and go deeper into Russia towards either something strategic like the nuclear power plant, or to Kursk city, or to another oblast, or another oblast has a breakthrough, an offensive that totally destabilizes Russia. There's a lot of things that can happen. And of course, we're going to look back at it as the black swan and say, oh, but of course, it was obvious it would happen. But typically, if you look at history, it's very rare that you see that the big thing is about to happen. But what you can have a feeling of is that there's not a lot of little things all pointing in the same direction, little things all pointing in the same direction. And at some point, they reach the critical mass and they start spinning faster and faster as they go down the hill. Until it just gets out of control, and it snowballs and becomes bigger and bigger and bigger until it just becomes a crisis that the government cannot handle. And I think that's actually how the Putin regime will end, and how this war will end, will be something like that, which could truly happen at any time. It's not something we can easily predict.
To this point of Putin trying to avoid the reality, it's obvious that whenever Putin is facing a tough choice or a tough decision, he tries to put it aside from himself as much as possible. The bunker that he went to during the COVID pandemic, then there's this huge table that he used to sit during his meetings with public officials. And so I see now a lot of comparison of Putin with Stalin, who in 1945, after the Nazi Germany attacked, invaded the Soviet Union, who ran away and sat down for several days, refusing to believe that Hitler indeed violated the 1939 agreement with Stalin. Do you think, Jason, that that's the kind of personal trait of Putin that he to have, or is it the systemic Soviet and then Russian kind of trait that that people, public officials, inherit from their predecessors, and it's just run through the Soviet and Russian public administration system?
I think it's twofold, and I have contemplated this exact question before, and I actually think it's twofold. I think on one side, I don't think Vladimir Putin's a very good manager. He's never shown any good signs of being a strong manager. I mean, he got to where he is in St. Petersburg by participating in the corruption of the Sobchak government and helping to create the whole system that was getting kickback from, and that was what he was skilled at. I mean, he was just a corrupt official, and that's and he was willing to do things that were really bloody, like blow up the Moscow apartment buildings. So the guy, got to where he is not through, I would say, great intellect or really having a strong idea of how to manage people, but by how to appease his boss or appease those around him in the way that he needed to in order to be promoted. Likewise, when you get to what else we can say about this personality trait of avoiding problems, I think it also stems from the fact that Putin, one, as I said, lacks the knowledge or lacks the ability to understand, but two, I think he really thinks it's below him. I think that he really does believe that he is, at this stage especially, sort of a god. I mean, for people I knew that knew Putin when he first became president, he was hands-on. I mean, he did have more of an interest in trying to understand how things worked and trying to tackle things personally. As far as we can tell, as time has passed, he's become less and less and less attached to these things. And more, I think he does think of his own self as being above all this, that, the little people should go take care of this, which is how he views, I think, most everybody in the world, that his, colleague, go take care of this. And that's why he increasingly, just look at the people he appoints to positions. His cousin, who he just made Deputy Minister of Defense, she does not have the background that would qualify her for such a job. Granted, she's not an important deputy ministership, but still, it's why a cousin? Why did he appoint this guy who he just appointed to take care of Kursk? The people that are personally close to him. So this, and what does that mean? It means he trusts them. So ultimately, Vladimir Putin is, I think, in his mind, thinks, well, since I trust them, I like them, they'll take care of the problems, I don't have to get involved. And that's what he wants. I think he's just a terrible leader. I mean, just objectively, he's not a good leader of his government.
Sergey, we have a question among our audience asking if the Russians living in the Kursk region will be angry at Ukraine or if they would blame Putin for what's happening. We briefly already talked about it, this aspect that Russians are blaming Putin personally, which is quite an unusual situation for the failure of the Russian army in the Kursk region. But do you see some of the blame being assigned to the Ukrainians from the Russian side?
Well, I don't think that the Russians are. I would formulate it differently. I think that many Russians blame Ukraine for everything, literally everything, and the U.S. and the other countries in NATO has attacked us. We are such a peaceful nation. We have never done anything bad. We have provided Europe with literacy, literature, sewer systems. We invented the will, the combustion engine, nuclear power plant, and extrajudiciary executions. Why do they hate us? So, of course, they blame Ukraine. But if you think about what is going on the ground, then you see, and that is what we saw in Suja. People are not stupid. They understand what is going on. They understand when you bomb Ukraine day and night, and sometimes maybe Ukraine will bomb you back. And I think that the Russians, the Russians have a very special view on the state. In contrary to many nations, the Russians do not see the state as the instrument of their own will. That is what is, for example, written in our German constitution, that the state is the instrument, how the people make their wishes and hopes real. So in Russia, it's differently. In Russia, they see the state as a separate entity. And there are speculations why they think so. Some say it's because of the Golden Horde. I personally don't believe in that, but some love this explanation. Some say it's because Russia is so large country, huge colonial empire, and you cannot just identify yourself with Moscow and the Moscow president if you live in Vladivostok, like 7 hours time difference. Maybe, I don't know. And actually, I don't care. For my purpose, it is important to understand that the Russians see the state as a separate entity, which has very high value for them, but which they believe acts on its own. And the state takes decision about your life, which is weird. I was like, okay, when I'm a bureaucrat, am I a part of the state or am I not? Who knows? But they start to believe that the state is something different to the people. And the moment when the state demonstrates its weakness, they don't know what to do. They just say, okay, we're such average people, we just wait, and maybe something good will happen, maybe we will be spared. So the moment when the Russians see that someone stronger than the Russian state came to Russia and just pushed the Russian state away, they will say, okay, maybe we should just accept it. And that's very interesting. That's really very interesting, because that gives a lot of hope that the moment when the Russian military machine will be defeated, the change to something new will be so smooth and so fast that nobody will even like see how it happened. Like yesterday there was a terrible Russian empire, and today we have something new. Of course, the process of democratization needs to be, of course, demilitarization, of course, re-education, removal of all these imperial lies from the heads of the Russians, control of a nuclear arsenal, and. But it is interesting to understand that the defeat of Russia's military imperialist machine is the core step and is an unavoidable step for gaining peace in Europe. What recently Vladimir Karamurza said in his interview is totally bullshit. Like totally bullshit. Like I said, it is impossible to have peaceful Europe without strong democratic Russia. No. Strong democratic Russia is an oxymoron. Because Russia is the name of the empire, of the genocidal empire. You can create like democratic states on the territory which is now being controlled by Russian empire, but it is not what you like
to this point of separation between the Russian people and the state, and that based on my chats with some people observing what's happening from within Russia, and people unfortunately consuming Russian propaganda, there is a clear messaging in Russian state-owned media to separate those to separate people from the state purposefully, and now it is reflected in the kind of call of on people to support the Russian army, because first of all, the Russian state-owned TV spreading lies that the Ukrainian soldiers are killing civilians, just shooting at cars, killing children and elderly people. So the usual BS that Russia has been spreading for the past 10 years when it comes to Ukraine. But also there is this call on helping the Russian army with provisions, with clothes, with food, whatever people can spare, similarly to what was happening during the so-called Great Patriotic War, the World War II that Russians are called the Great Patriotic War. So there's this clear messaging of removing the Russian state from this equation and putting the the demand to support the Russian army on the people directly. Jason, did you ever encounter this Russia's willful removal of the state from the relations between the Russian people and the army or any other institution? So why is there's why, at least at the moment, does it feel like it's a willful decision of the Russian state to remove itself from this relationships within the country?
Well, I think that for the as of any government, you want to have as much buy-in from your population as possible. When you have a war that's becoming increasingly costly, both in terms of lives as well as wealth, and the economic situation in the country is becoming worse and worse, how do you still get buy-in more than 2 years later when it's clear that most Russians probably really don't buy in to the war anymore? They're not really on board with this fully, and that things are getting a little bit wilder. So you have to show that somehow this is directly, their war as well. It's not like the people in Kursk who we spoke to, who all put the blame directly on Putin. I'm not surprised that any of them did not want to say that they had supported the war in Ukraine initially. I would be very surprised if they admitted that. But at the same time, as a regime goes, increasingly people are, I think, going to start separating themselves, starting to say that, well, that's Putin's war, not my war, or that is the government. And that's something that starts to become, it's a double-edged sword. On one side, there's no accountability for the government, so that's good for Putin. But at this stage, there's not even buy-in from the people. That becomes a slippery slope. Because at what point does that start to get so out of control that he does sort of become sort of not an imposter, but somebody who is sitting there without any means of even trying to claim legitimacy? Obviously, he doesn't win the elections that he's in legitimately, but even as a dictator, he's there. But at some point, when there's enough people around him, the critical mass, whether it's the oligarchy or the intelligence service or the military, decides that he's no longer beneficial to their interest, his risk of being able to maintain power really increases. I think that anyone who falls from power, it's going to be a series of different events, one after another. It leads to a point where you're just not able to keep it together. Historically, the most important thing is that Putin needs to maintain the control of the military or the intelligence service, best of both. But if he loses control of just one of them, which I think with the military it's increasingly probable as it just collapses, I think things can get very, very dangerous for him.
So we're talking about how dictators maintain their control over a state. It's usually a circle of friends or a circle of close people whose support is essential for any dictator to maintain their grip on power. Are there any developments when it comes to Russian oligarchs, the Russian state close, the Russian businessmen close to the state? Did they change their rhetoric as they used to during the initial stages of the invasion, saying that they're against this war, or did the Kursk offensive did it not change any such public attitudes among the Russian oligarchs?
Well, I mean, Oleg Deripaska did say, make some statements recently that the war needs to be wrapped up. So I guess it is one indication of it. But others who are closer to the Kremlin haven't really said much, which is typical. But I think typically, if Putin is really going to end, I have a hypothesis about this, which is that I think a very realistic way that he could end is something that game theory would support, which is that those around Putin ultimately realize that he's going to die. He's mortal. He's 72 years old. And so you're either going to wait for that moment, which could come at any second to just a heart attack or whatever, which would put you at risk if the oligarchs or the class or the group who comes to power after Putin, let's imagine it's a different faction of the oligarchy that is against your faction of it, is very dangerous because the other faction comes to power. They are going to definitely get rid of you and your family and take over your assets. So it's your own strategic interest to be the one that makes the move, not to wait for history, by chance, end Putin. It's much wiser to end Putin yourself. And when you find enough people who are opposed to the Putin regime, whether it's, as I said, from the military, from intelligence, or whatever it is, those who are in the inner class close to Putin, it will not be the people of Russia, but the inner class close to Putin, who realize, let's bet on Prigozhin or whoever it is at that moment. This might be our moment. And they can make a deal and foster some sort of agreement with each other. To put a bomb on an airplane of Putin's is not that complicated. To do something like that is easier to do than what I think many people would realize. So all you need is the buy-in from the right people to know how to organize it. And you could organize the end of the Putin regime and to have a very good shot of being able to maintain power, take power of the Kremlin.
While we're trying to establish connection with Sergey again. I'm going to go through the chat and read some of the questions. So first of all, the question about the Russian refugees from the Kursk region, and if there are anyone traveling to Moscow, trying to seek shelter in Moscow. Jason, are there any reports about Russian refugees and which regions did they go to?
There have been Russian refugees that have gone different directions. I mean, Russia is also giving out bonuses to people that are refugees, but it doesn't. I'm not familiar with the statistics on that, to be frank. Perhaps Sergey does know. But I think that overall, Russia's going to have an increasingly difficult time with these people. I mean, what do you do to admit to your larger population that you cannot control a situation in Kursk? This is absurd. I mean, it's just really absurd. How does Putin come to acknowledge that? And I think when it spreads, which it will spread, I have no doubt that the Ukrainians are planning the next steps of this, or it's been planned. They're waiting for the Russians to take whatever action it is in response to Kursk. I'm absolutely certain that this is not about Kursk. This is not a little part of Belgrade. I'm quite certain this is part of something much, much larger, because Ukraine just doesn't have the resources to bet so big on a provincial part of Kursk. I think it's something bigger. And so I think that let's see what happens next. But Russia could have a situation where there's many, many more refugees headed to different parts of the country, at which point I think that Putin, once again, he's at risk. Because even if you love Putin, you think he's great, if you're as an oligarch that's near him or the head of an organization near him, such as the military, at some point, if you realize it's in your own interest to end him in order to improve your own lot in life, I think that's very realistic. Could happen.
Yeah,
but I also think that it demonstrates the difference between Ukraine and Russia, whereas when in Ukraine people starting fleeing from the territories occupied by Russia or shelled by Russia, people went to the capital, Kyiv, and they knew where to go to. There is a clear building where the presidential office is located. There is a clear building where the parliamentary has its sittings. And that wasn't an individual incidence of people traveling to Kyiv, but that was a kind of larger national level movement where everyone tried to help each other. Whereas in Russia, if you try to go to Moscow, first of all, you cannot just show up in Moscow and don't have any specific reason to be there. So you can stay there for 3 months without specific documents. But if your documents are checked by the police, you might encounter problems. And even if you did get there, and even if you did get to Moscow in large numbers, where are you going to protest? Protests are not allowed in Russia, so people cannot go to the Red Square and demand aid from the Russian authorities. That's just not going to happen, and they're going to suffer from violence from the police or law enforcement agencies. And from what I understand, Sergey did manage to join us. I unfortunately am not sure if he can hear us, but I'm going to address the next question to you. Sergey, there's a question about the potential cutting off of energy in Kursk region, for instance, with the destruction of a nuclear power plant. And do you think that if this this destruction of refineries or the breaking down of the railway lines that would prevent people from leaving the territory, would it kind of increase the level of anger towards the Russian authorities?
Well, first of all, I pretty good hear you. I don't know why you cannot hear me or see me. I'm pretty good hear you, and I hope you can hear me and see me on the YouTube. At least I can see myself on the YouTube. The Kursk nuclear power plant is a tricky thing, really tricky thing, because first, some people started to speculate that the Ukrainians may try to take control over the Kursk power plant, while the Russians hijacked Zaporizhia power plant in Ukraine, and so there could be some sort of a deal, etc., on exchange it. I don't believe in such things. I really don't believe in such things. It's too complicated. It's like invention of some additional reality, additional complicated things. And I don't believe that Putin would be ready to exchange Zaporizhia power plant, which he thinks is a very valuable asset, to anything. He loves this asset. he wants to have it, and he will not exchange it. But what is really good for Zaporizhia power plant, oh, not for, sorry, for Kursk power plant, is that Kursk power plant is the heart of Russia's power supply, not only in Kursk region, in all neighboring regions, in Zaporizhia, in Belgorod. Oh no, sorry, once again, it's too late here, like in Vinnytsia where I am. In Belgorod, in Voronezh, in Smolensk, Kursk power plant is essential for supplying energy to this region. Essential. And if you don't need to take control of a Kursk power plant. If you hit the transformator lines, transformator centers and power lines which go out of Kursk power plant, nuclear power plant, you cut, if I'm not mistaken, 49% of power supply for Kursk region and about 20% of power supply of the neighbor region. The Ukrainians have demonstrated earlier by their targeted hits on Krasnodar region in south of Russia against the power lines that this is actually the only reason how to bring the Russians to the streets to protest. The Russians never protested, or almost never protested, against the cruelties of atrocities of the Russian army, even against their own losses of the Russian army. But they started to protest when in Krasnodar in summer, they had no power and refrigerator could not keep your meat. Like, just imagine the smell. So they started to protest. They went to the streets and they started to protest, and they started to demand the end of the war. The Russian grassroots anti-war protests started the moment when the Ukrainians cut energy supply for the Russian province in Krasnodar in summer, which caused the collapse of refrigerator system. Wonderful. So if you do the same with Kursk, you impose a huge, huge impact, not only on this 1,000 square kilometers area around the border, but to the whole region. Think about the military consequences. A lot of Russian military bases and military equipment, air defense, radars, electronic warfare, you name it, air bases, they need line supply. Of course, they have some generators. They can function for a certain amount of time, but they cannot function forever on generators. It will significantly weaken Russian presence in the region, both militarily and logistically and politically. That's why I believe that the Ukrainian operation in Kursk region is such a perfect, brilliant thing, because in some military operations which are badly planned, not bad because they are unsuccessful, but because they are planned the way that they can be unsuccessful very easily. That is the German way of planning military operations, to plan a chain. And if you are not successful at one certain element of this chain, the next elements are out of your reach. That is how the Germans planned, the German generals planned assassination of Adolf Hitler in 1944. A chain of events, and only each chain part you need to get 100% success. Otherwise, you will not get the success. And they have failed, and they were executed. But the Ukrainians now planned an operation which has a massive, massive number of consequences. Each of them is good for Ukraine, but none of them is directly connected to each other. It is like radiating rays of the sun, creating of additional ambiguity against the Russians. One, stretching Russians' defensive line, getting POWs for exchange, destroying Russian equipment, bringing the war to Russian soil. So when the Ukrainians liberated Ukrainian cities in Ukraine, they still had to strike Ukrainian soil, destroy Ukrainian buildings, damage Ukrainian infrastructure. Now the fighting is in Russia. The Ukrainians have destroyed a bridge. Who cares? It's a Russian bridge. So that is very good. The third, the next thing is that cut logistics, railways, roads, energy logistics is the next logical step. Just do it and see what happens, and see that Russian collapse comes closer, collapse of the, at least in this region, of Russian economy. And that is really amazing. I think that's why Kursk is very important, not because, yes, the Ukrainians wanted to take it and then to offer Putin a deal, exchange it for Zaporizhia power plant. Bullshit. No, the Ukrainians don't think that stupid, that German way, like thinking out of the box, creating a diplomatic solution. They create a reality which is stronger than your diplomatic pressure. And this reality starts to do your job, and that is amazing. I hope, Sasha, that you could now hear me, because I'm pretty sure that I was on YouTube in broadcasting.
Yes. Yes, I managed to reconnect, and you're finally back to my screen. I wanted to emphasize the point of Ukrainian strikes on the Russian energy infrastructure that happened because there are restrictions imposed by Ukrainian international allies on what military sites on the territory of Russia, Ukraine can and cannot target. And so because Ukraine is quite limited in the use of Western-provided weapons, it had to improvise and use drones, UAVs, to strike Russian energy infrastructure. And actually, there were reports that indicated that Russia and Ukraine were discussing a possible summit in Qatar in August 2020. To discuss a possible moratorium on the strikes of both countries on each other's energy infrastructure. So Russia has been destroying Ukrainian energy infrastructure basically from the very beginning of the full-scale invasion, but largely from the winter 2022-2023. Ukraine has lost a lot of energy production capabilities and energy distribution capabilities. And once Russia started tasting the taste of its own medicine, once Ukraine commenced striking the Russian energy infrastructure, Russia clearly didn't like it. And so there were possible talks about the kind of imposing a moratorium on the energy strikes between two countries. And once the Kursk offensive commenced, Russia has suspended these talks, or suspended the talks before those talks, because clearly it wasn't in a position to negotiate from an upper hand, from a kind of a higher level position as it used to negotiate. And so my next question goes both to you. There's clearly a need to change the Western understanding of the Ukrainian military strategy and tactics and what Ukraine can and cannot do. And one of them is to lift those restrictions, to give Ukraine the ability to strike Russian military sites, regardless of where they are located. What do you think else is important? So we changes with policy shifts from the side of Ukrainian allies should be implemented in order to give Ukraine the possibility to fight with two hands and not with one hand and the other one behind its back.
Well, I think the most important policy shift that Ukraine has expected or needed was the ability to use the weapons that have been donated to it in the fashion that Ukraine deems to be best. That's first and foremost. It's absolutely absurd that we've decided to limit Ukraine, once again, out of this ongoing absurd fear of red lines and escalation and nuclear war. In addition to that, I think the second thing is that, and it's a domestic policy issue, is that the United States, even if it were to really increase the production of things like ATACMS, for instance, it's totally inconsequential. The amount of weapons that the U.S. in the new plan for ATACMS is a good example that Biden proposed. It would be producing weapons at a rate that is per month would produce enough of them that's half of the need of the Ukrainian military per month. Forget the U.S. military, which needs a lot more, but for the NATO countries that need a lot more. This is for the Ukrainian military. It's half of what they would use in a month, and it takes 1 month to produce that. So that's not a serious increase. That's not going to be nearly sufficient, that means, for Ukraine to be able to use them, and certainly not for the U.S. to even use them if it were to be brought into a serious conflict that was land warfare. And I think that is a tragedy. But both those issues show just a lack of planning. I think that the United States fears the potential for things that are, for tons of things, different things it fears. I think for Jake Sullivan, he's going to be proud when he finishes his term, and he'll say, well, at least when, I was the head of the National Security Council, we did not have a nuclear war with Russia. And, at least Russia did not collapse, which I think is also something to be very proud of. Putin did not fall from power, and then there was a regime change. God knows who would come to power. which is absolutely absurd because Putin will eventually die and someone else is going to come to power. So we can help guide that, or we can just let it go to chance, which is what Sullivan is arguing for. But I think, just generally speaking, the U.S.'s lack of strategy in dealing with Russia in supporting Ukraine or in supporting Ukraine in order to oppose Russia is just tragically lacking. If it's the ATACMS or the ability to use long-range weapons, or if it's to allow regime change in Russia or things that could destabilize the Russian government, it's truly insane the way that the U.S. has limited Ukraine so far.
Sergey, what would be your recommendations?
Well, we know, like, out of these almost 3 years of war, we know that no weapon provides a full dominance over your enemy.
Is a wonder weapon.
Wunderwaffe. We say it Wunderwaffe. And there is no such thing as wonder weapon or Wunderwaffe. By the way, like, if we stick to the parallels with World War II, and Wunderwaffe, wonder weapon, was a term that the Nazis created to boost the moral of their population and say, okay, we have created one weapon which can, like, wipe out the armies of the enemy and to win. But there is another one parallel, and that's parallel which is bad for Russia. In Germany, we had Chancellor Adolf Hitler, who loved to think that he's a great general and strategist, master strategist, and he wanted to plan personally operation and personally guide the operations and run them and control them, like this micromanaging that. And the result was great. Germany has lost the war. Like, the North has lost the war. What could be better results of this micromanaging? So now Vladimir Putin seems to micromanage his war. And that's a good sign. Like, let Putin micromanage his war. Let Putin play Adolf Hitler. And let us pray that he ends like Adolf Hitler. But regarding your first question about the weapons, we know there is no such thing as Wunderwaffe or wonder weapon. But there is weapons which is needed in a complex, in the right time, in the right place, and in the right amount, right number. So what we see now, until now, that Ukraine got all the weapons which were good in insufficient numbers, in insufficient time, like not enough, not fast enough, and in addition to that, with restrictions. We know that even now, even for the missile strikes within Ukraine's legitimate, internationally recognized territory, Ukraine needs to get green light for each single strike of Atacms or Storm Shadow or Skull. So it is insane. Like, you have, like, the location of Russian army on your land. You want to kill the bastards, and you need to get a permission for that. Why? And I don't talk about, like, killing the Russian soldiers across the border, which is quite another topic. I don't know why. But even on the Ukrainian territory, and that's a problem. So what is needed? Once again, it's not one type of weapon. We need a complex. Ukraine needs air superiority. Without air superiority, you cannot run successful offensive. It is proven by any offensive operation, including Ukraine's misguided and failed offensive in June 23. But not only that, Ukraine needs long-range strikes, because you don't want to hit the enemy when the enemy has arrived to the front line. You want to hit the enemy in a train. You want to hit the enemy on a training camp. You want to hit enemy's logistics. You want to hit enemy's railway stations. And. You want to hit bridges over Russian rivers. Russia has large rivers and not that much bridges. We need to hit all the bridges, like up to Siberia. Just cut Russia apart, like hitting bridges, airfields. Russia has not that much strategic bombers, and they don't produce new ones. It's a limited good. One of the advantages of Russia against Ukraine is that Russia may hit the whole Ukrainian territory up to the border to Poland or Slovakia or Hungary, but Ukraine cannot hit the whole Russian territory up to Vladivostok. We can dispute about if Ukraine must get weapons which can hit Russia for 2,000, 3,000 kilometers, but what is needed, we need to stop Russia from being able to send missiles to Uzhhorod, Lviv, and other cities in the west, so to reduce the strategic depth of Russian strikes. How can we do it? Russia uses cruise missiles for that. These cruise missiles are being launched either from the naval vessels or from the planes. Naval vessels, Ukrainians have almost solved this problem by destroying Russia's Black Sea fleet, but the strategic bombers remain. So Russia has Tupolev 95, Tupolev 22, and Tupolev 160 strategic bombers, and also MiG-31, which is used for Kinjal, but okay, you can just neglect it. It's not that much. So you need to kill these airplanes. You need to kill these strategic bombers. And for that, you need to strike the Russian airfields, which are open airfields, with cluster munition. So easy. Just think about how old these jets are, or not even jets, propeller bombers, like Tupolev 95. Tupolev 95 has 4 double propeller turbo engines. NK-21, I believe, NK-21. NK-21, Nikolai Kuznetsov 21, was not developed by Nikolai Kuznetsov. Nikolai Kuznetsov was the head of the construction office. The developer was captive German Nazi, Austrian Nazi, Colonel of SS Brandner, who was captured by the Soviets. He was an engineer at the BMW and later for the German army. And he developed this engine. Up till now, it's the world's most powerful turbo propeller engine. And it is needed to bring Tupolev 95 into the air. And Russians cannot produce it anymore. It is the shit created by a Nazi SS colonel in 1950s for Stalin to bring nuclear device to the ass. And now Russians use it to hit Ukraine. Just destroy these bombers. Just destroy them, and the problem will be solved. So long-range strikes, enough jets, enough artillery, enough tanks, enough anything, and Ukraine will win, because we still drop feed Ukraine, and that's just wrong. That's just wrong.
Yeah, there were reports this summer that Ukraine had an ability to destroy a few dozens of 100 of Russian glide bombs carriers that were parked in one airfield, and that Ukraine didn't get a permission from the US to use US-produced weapons to strike it, and those aircraft were relocated. I think this is one of the most well-known, but unfortunately not the only examples of Ukraine not being able to effectively hit Russian military sites and be able to defend its population. So guys, I'm gonna pose one last question just to give our audience the opportunity to donate to the Ukrainian army. We have the link in the video description and the live stream description. Go please and help us help Ukraine win. In every small donation matters. But since our live stream was dedicated to your trip to the Ukrainian-controlled, Ukrainian-occupied territory of Russia, to Kursk region, I would be really happy if you can summarize your experience of this trip, what you've seen there, the people that you talked to, in a few sentences. How was the feelings on the ground? Jason.
So, overall, I think the feelings on the ground is that the Russians know how this happened to them, the people that live in their occupation. I didn't see any that felt shocked or that it was offensive. And there's two things I want to note, is that the Ukrainian soldiers themselves are polite. Even when they're talking about the local population, they refer to them as the citizens or the residents. They don't use, talking to even us, so I mean, they can say whatever they want to us, and we wouldn't care. But they didn't use, derogatory terms to refer to the Russian inhabitants. And as far as I could tell, the inhabitants had no fear of the Ukrainian soldiers. So I think that's sort of important to note. It's quite the opposite when Russia shows up to your town in Ukraine. I don't think that there's anyone who feels comfortable to just see them coming your way. In our case, we approached people. They realized that we just got in a car with the Ukrainian military, and they weren't afraid to talk to us. They were not walking the other direction. They weren't trying to avoid us. They were hostile or passively aggressive. Completely normal. So I think it's very important. And also very important is that there are things that lack right now, such as water and I think food supplies, but the Ukrainians are working on fixing that. We know that. They've mentioned that. So I don't think the Ukrainians are just going to leave these people to their fate. I'm sure that will not happen. So that's a big difference than when Russia shows up to a Ukrainian village. And once again, I think the Ukrainians are smart enough to know that just strategically, as a point of psychology, it's much more in their interest when the people there say, no, we're well treated, there's no problems here, and they report that back to their relatives throughout the rest of Russia once there's phone communication established again. That's a rumor they want to spread. It's in Ukraine's interest that people think, the Ukrainian army's not bad. They're not these fascists that we were promised that they're going to be. How's that? So I think that's a positive. So overall, though, I think that the fact that so many people are willing to assign blame to Putin shows the deeper problems within Russian society and the deeper problems with the Putin regime is that there is less and less support for it, and far less support than I think he believes there is. And it gives me great optimism that there could be an event that will just spark, as Lenin referred to it, that will cause everything else to just take revolutionary change. And how that happens, or how the overthrow of the government comes, or the end of the Putin era is hard to predict. But I think it will be something will be sudden. It'll be perhaps in the course of minutes or in the course of a few days, but not more. And we'll see the end of this war criminal. But we can hope that that is what's happening now in Kursk. Will be one of the steps that help contribute to that.
Sergej, I think this impressions of the Russian citizens living in the Kursk region rhymes a lot with the story that you told about 2 Russian soldiers who tried to kill themselves, fearing the Ukrainian soldiers. Can you explain this story and also sum up your impressions from the trip to the Kursk region?
Yeah, absolutely. This is a story we have discussed earlier with you. And it was an interview with 2 Russian soldiers, conscripts, who were captured by the Ukrainian army. And they were interviewed in the hospital. Why they have been to the hospital? Because they had multiplied shrapnel wounds on their legs. How did they got their shrapnel wounds? Well, they were 19. They were brainwashed by their commanders. And the commanders told them that, if you got captured by the Ukrainians, you will be tortured. You will be your limbs will be cut off. You will be castrated. You will be everything. What the Russians do with Ukrainian soldiers. And of course, the Russian soldiers believe that because they know what they do with the Ukrainian soldiers. Mm-hmm. Okay? So the moment when these 2 Russian conscripts faced that the captivity is inevitable, they said, okay, we have hacked each other. We have took a grenade, hand grenade, removed the ring, and we dropped it on the ground. But as the conscripts, they were so badly prepared for anything, so they could not have killed themselves with a grenade. So the grenade detonated, they were wounded, but they were alive. And they were found by the Ukrainian soldiers who provided them with first aid and who brought them to the hospital. And luckily, they were such bad soldiers that they could not even severely wound themselves with a hand grenade, not speaking about being killed. So now they are in the hospital, and this 9 years Russian soldier, Russian prisoner of war, looks with these big eyes at the camera team and said, yeah, but it's not what we were expecting, not what we were told. It's quite different. Yes, of course it's different, because Ukraine is a democratic country, European democratic country, and your country is a terrorist state. Russia is a terrorist state. That's the difference. But that is, I think that is why it is almost impossible to influence the Russian population with telling them truth, because they just won't believe. First, you will not reach them. Second, they will not believe. The only way to influence them is to damage Russian economy and Russian statehood and Russian army to that extent that it cannot hold its grip on the population. Then it will collapse. And as I told before, the Russians are not prepared for taking actions. They will just wait for something to happen. And in that moment, you can start relocating them, but not while they are on the influence of their state and believe that it is wrong. I think that is the most important lesson we learned from what is going on in Kursk. You just attack, you just take the territory, and then you start talking to the people, but not vice versa. Slava Ukraine.
Here. That was our special live stream of the European Resilience Initiative Center with two guests, Jason J. Smart, a correspondent of the English language media outlet Kyiv Post, and the founder and managing director of the European Resilience Initiative Center, Sergej Sumlenny. They shared their experience and their impressions from the trip to the Ukrainian occupied territory of Russia's Kursk region. And I do hope that we will have the opportunity to report more on this issue and update what's going on on the front line in Ukraine, with the hope that this war will soon end with the Ukrainian victory. Slava Ukraini!
Героям слава!
So,
Okay, guys, now we are waiting until it will end. And I will stop the translation, the rest of the broadcasting, but not before.
Are you still broadcasting?